Welcome to Close Your Eyes, Listen to Stories. Close your eyes, relax, and let me take you into the story. Before Zeus became a statue, he was a hidden cry in a cave. The ruler of the sky began as a child his father wanted to erase. If you listen closely, the first sound in his story is not thunder at all, but the careful breathing of an infant guarded by secrecy. The world that received him was already bruised by family fear. Earth, in Greek thought, was not a stage built for the gods after they arrived. Earth herself, Gaia, was one of the first beings, broad and fertile and deep with ancient intention. From her came Uranus, the sky, and together they produced the Titans. Yet even in that earliest divine household, power was tangled with dread. Uranus pressed some of his children out of sight, and Gaia, aching with anger, armed her Titan son Kronos with a sickle. Kronos struck his father and took the rule of the cosmos, but the victory carried a curse inside it. He had learned that authority could be stolen by a child. So when Kronos heard that one of his own children was destined to overthrow him, he turned prophecy into appetite. One by one, he swallowed the children born to Rhea, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Greek myth tells this with an image both grotesque and strangely simple. The king of the world did not slay his children in battle. He lifted them in his hands and hid them in his own body. You can feel in that story an old terror that still makes sense. The fear that love might be devoured by control, that a parent might choose possession over tenderness. Rhea, worn raw by grief, sought help from Gaia and from the memory of the deep earth that had outlasted every ruler so far. When her next child was ready to be born, she went away to Crete. There in one tradition on Mount Dicte and in another on Mount Ida, she brought Zeus into the world. The details vary, as myths often do when they cross valleys and generations, but the feeling remains constant. He entered life in hiding. Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and placed it in Kronos' hands. The Titan swallowed the stone, believing he had consumed his last danger. Meanwhile, the real child was carried into the mountain. Nymphs became his nurses. Some names are given as Adrastea and Ida. In some traditions, Amalthea is the nurturing goat who fed him. In others, Amalthea is herself a nymph, with the goat standing nearby in the story like a second memory. Ancient storytellers did not always care to make every version agree. They cared that abundance surrounded the child who had been denied safety. Goat's milk, wild honey, clear water, the scent of pine resin, rough stone cool beneath small hands. These are the textures of Zeus before the lightning. There is a lovely strangeness in the stories of those who kept him hidden. The Curetes, armed dancers or young guardians, clashed their shields and stamped their feet so Kronos would not hear the baby's cries. It is an image you can almost see in firelight. Bronze ringing against bronze, bodies spinning at the mouth of a cave, protecting new life with noise. In some later traditions, sacred bees fed Zeus honey in the cave, as if even the smallest makers of sweetness joined the conspiracy against fear. The mountain itself seems to take sides. Stone becomes cradle. Wind becomes cover. This hidden childhood matters because Greek religion never imagined Zeus as a god who had always rested comfortably on a throne. His kingship was earned through danger. Even his earliest worship may preserve that memory. On mountain peaks, in caves, beneath open sky, people honored him not only as ruler, but as a force bound to weather, height, and exposure. Long before poets dressed Olympus in shining halls, Zeus belonged to the places where you felt the nearness of cloud and cliff. So imagine him there, not yet bearded, not yet enthroned, not yet holding the thunderbolt. Imagine the child in the half-dark, hearing shields crash above him and goats shifting in the straw. Imagine the first opening of his eyes toward a seam of light at the cave mouth. Beyond it lay air, blue distance, and the sky that would one day speak in his voice. The myths do not hurry past this beginning, and neither should you. The King of God starts where many lasting stories start, in weakness, in concealment, in the patient hope that something small may survive long enough to change the world. When Zeus reached maturity, he did not walk straight from the cave to the throne. Between hidden childhood and open rule stood cunning alliance, and a war so long that later Greeks imagined the mountains themselves remembering it. One tradition says Zeus entered the household of Cronos in disguise, serving as cupbearer. There is something satisfying in that image. The lost son returns not with a trumpet of revelation, but with a cup in his hand. He is aided by Métis, whose name means cunning intelligence, the supple wisdom that sees around corners. At her counsel, Cronos drank a potion that forced him to disgorge what he had swallowed. Out came the stone, and then the gods he had tried to bury inside himself. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, alive because divinity in myth is difficult to destroy, but delayed, held in suspension by the greed of their father. From that moment, the conflict became cosmic. Zeus was no longer only the child who escaped. He was the organizer of rebellion. He gathered his siblings, and with them came loyalties from strange corners of the old universe. An important ally was Styx, daughter of Oceanus, who brought her children to Zeus before many others dared. Because she chose him early, the oath by the river Styx became the most binding vow among the gods. Even immortals, Greek myth insists, need a sacred line they should not cross. Zeus's order was built not only on force, but on the idea that spoken promises matter. He also freed powers that Cronos had left buried. The Cyclopes, imprisoned in darkness, were released and answered the favor with gifts. To Zeus they gave the thunderbolt, not merely a weapon, but a signature of rule. To Poseidon they gave the trident. To Hades, the helm of invisibility. In those gifts you can feel the Greek imagination sorting the world into realms: sky, sea, and underworld, each with its emblem, each with its temperament. The thunderbolt is often pictured as pure violence, but in myth it is also clarity. Lightning reveals the landscape for an instant. It makes the hidden stand out sharp and undeniable. That is part of Zeus's character too. He strikes, but he also exposes. Then began the Titanomachy, the war between the younger gods and the Titans. Some sources say it lasted 10 years. That number feels ceremonial, a full measure of endurance. For 10 years Olympus and Othries faced one another, height against height. The Titans had size, age, and old authority. Zeus had energy, allies, and the fresh confidence of a new generation. Yet victory did not come until he released the hundred-handers, the Cinemanes, beings of immense force who could hurl stones in terrible showers. The war turns at that point from stalemate to avalanche. Ancient poets loved that shift, the sudden moment when history seems to gather speed. You can picture the battle as Hesiod suggests it: earth shaking, sea boiling, the sky groaning with impact. But if you listen beneath the crash, another theme is moving there. Zeus is not simply the strongest fighter in the poem. He is the one who can assemble a coalition. He knows when to free the neglected, when to reward loyalty, when to place trust in those who have suffered under the old regime. That is kingship in a mythic register. It is noisy and violent. Yes, but it is also political. When the Titans fell, some were cast into Tartaros, the deep prison below the world, guarded by the very hundred-handers who had helped win the war. Atlas, in a famous punishment, was made to bear the sky. Here Greek myth shows its hard edge. Zeus's victory is just, from the Olympian point of view, but not gentle. Order arrives with chains as well as law. After the war, the brothers divided the realms by lot. Zeus received the sky, Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld, while Earth remained a shared domain. That detail is easy to miss, but explains much. Zeus is supreme, yet he is not owner of all things in a simple sense. Greek myth rarely imagines absolute control without remainder. Other powers persist. Other claims endure. Even the ruler of Olympus governs a world with boundaries. Still, the center had shifted. The hidden infant of Crete now stood where storm and sovereignty met. The stone that Cronos swallowed was later shown at Delphi, a relic of deception turned into proof of survival. And Zeus, armed with lightning, became the visible sign that the universe had changed hands. When thunder rolled over mountain ridges, Greeks could hear in it the memory of revolution, not a quiet inheritance, not a peaceful coronation, but a throne won after fear was dragged into the open and made to release what it had consumed. If Zeus had been only a conqueror, he would not have remained so alive in the Greek imagination. He endured because he ruled in many registers at once. He was the thunderer above peaks, but also the god invoked at doorways, in courtyards, at shared tables, and over solemn promises. To speak of Zeus properly is to speak of his many names, because each title reveals a different angle of divine kingship. Zeus Xenios protected guest friendship, the sacred bond between host and stranger. In a world of dangerous roads and uncertain travel, this mattered deeply. A stranger at the gate might be helpless, noble, deceitful, or sent by God. Hospitality was never only good manners. It was a test of civilization under the eye of Zeus. Zeus Horkios guarded oaths. Zeus Hykatesios watched over suppliants who clasped an altar or knees in desperate appeal. Zeus Tesios, less famous now, but intimate in ancient homes, was linked to the storeroom jar, the household's reserve of oil, grain, and security. People kept his symbol in the house itself, often a jar with a simple ritual significance, because prosperity did not feel abstract to them. It smelled like olives and barley. It was measured in what remained on the shelf after hard weather. There is also Zeus Herkios of the courtyard enclosure, honored near the center of family space, and Zeus Mylikios, a gentler or more propitiated form who could be represented in serpent shape, carrying older, more chthonic undertones. These local and specialized forms remind you that Greek religion was not one smooth theological system. It was a living network of practices. Zeus was not only the figure on Olympus with an eagle. He was also the divine presence felt in the architecture of daily survival. And yet the grand symbols mattered too. The eagle, sharp-eyed and descending from high air, expressed royal oversight. The oak, especially at Dodona, carried another side of Zeus, not the flash of lightning, but the long murmur of counsel. At Dodona, One of the oldest Greek oracles, priests and priestesses listened to the rustling leaves of a sacred oak, to bronze vessels that rang in the wind, to subtle sounds moving through air. This is one of the most beautiful contradictions in his character. The god of thunder also speaks in whispers. Later art fixed him in a familiar form, mature, bearded, broad-browed, holding scepter and thunderbolt. But even that image contains a tension. He is powerful enough to terrify, yet composed enough to judge. Phidias's colossal statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the wonders of the ancient world, seated him in calm magnificence, gold and ivory shining. Ancient viewers said that if the god stood up, he would break through the roof. That detail feels almost like a smile tucked inside reverence. Zeus is so vast that even temples are a little too small for him. His marriage to Hera belongs here as well, because kingship in Greek myth is never free from domestic weather. Hera is queenly, sharp, proud, and often wounded by Zeus's betrayals. Their marriage is sacred, politically central, and emotionally stormy. There are moments of tenderness in some traditions, but there is also competition, suspicion, and retaliation. Greek poets did not protect their chief god from contradiction. Zeus could establish order in the cosmos while disordering his own household. This complexity made him useful for thought. A flat god teaches little. Zeus, however, gathers opposites. He is sky and law, desire and restraint, generosity and punishment. When a king wished to look legitimate, Zeus offered a model of sovereignty. When a victim needed protection, Zeus was invoked as guardian of the vulnerable. When a liar swore falsely, Zeus stood in the background of that risk. You can see, then, why his worship spread across so many Greek communities and lasted for centuries. He could be local without ceasing to be cosmic. On a mountaintop altar blackened by sacrifice, in a household courtyard, beneath the leaves at Dodona, beside the games at Olympia, Zeus felt near for different reasons. His greatness was not only that he ruled the sky. It was that the sky seemed broad enough to cover justice, shelter, hunger, travel, fear, abundance, and the fragile seriousness of a promise spoken aloud. In that sense, Zeus became more than a character in stories. He became a way of organizing experience. When rain came at the needed hour, when an oath held firm, when a guest was received kindly, when power was judged rather than merely feared, Greeks could sense his presence. Not always as comfort, sometimes as warning, but always as a reminder that the world above the human roof was not empty. No gentle retelling of Zeus can avoid the most difficult part of his mythology. He is a god of overwhelming desire, and his desires often leave disruption behind them. Ancient stories told this again and again, not to soften him in a romance, but to show how dangerous divine attention can be when it falls upon mortal lives. Take Europa, the Phoenician princess gathering flowers near the shore. Zeus saw her and came not as a storm, but as a white bull, beautiful and strangely mild. She touched him, climbed upon his back, and he carried her across the sea to Crete. The image is luminous in art, bright skin against white hide and blue water, but the brightness does not erase the imbalance at its center. From their union came rulers and the echo of a name that later attached itself to a continent. Myth often works that way. Private fear leaves public geography behind. Then there is Io, whom Zeus desired and Hera suspected. To conceal the affair, Zeus transformed Io into a heifer. yet concealment only changed the form of suffering. Hera claimed the animal and set Argus Panoptes, the many-eyed watcher, to guard her. Hermes killed Argus, but Io's wandering did not end. Driven by a gadfly across lands and waters, she became a moving map of torment. Ancient Greeks trace place names through her path. You can hear in the story a bleak truth about Zeus. Even when he intervenes, he does not always prevent the consequences of his own desire. Leto's story carries a gentler sadness. Pregnant by Zeus, she was hounded by Hera and denied a place to give birth until Delos, a floating island, received her. There Apollo and Artemis were born, and the island gained sacred brilliance from sheltering a hunted mother. Zeus here is not the active source of violence in the episode, yet his choices set the pattern in motion. The myths let responsibility spread through divine relationships, but they do not let it disappear. Semele's tale is even more fragile. Loved by Zeus, she was deceived into asking him to appear in his full divine radiance, exactly as he came to Hera. Bound by oath, Zeus granted the request. Mortality could not endure that vision, and Semele was burned by the splendor. Yet from her ruined body Zeus rescued the unborn Dionysus, sewing the child into his own thigh until the proper time of birth. Terrible and tender sit side by side there. A god whose presence destroys also becomes an emergency cradle. There are other stories with other textures. Zeus joins with Mnemosyne, and from that union come the Muses, daughters of memory and song. He joins with Themis, and there emerge figures bound to justice and order. Athena, in one of myth's strangest births, springs armored from his head after he swallows Métis, trying once more to master prophecy through possession. But wisdom cannot remain buried. It arrives fully formed, crying out beneath the sky. His bond with Hera remains the most public mirror of these contradictions. Hera is not merely jealous in some shallow, decorative sense. She is the wife of a ruler whose authority does not restrain his appetite. Her anger, often harshly directed toward Zeus's lovers and children, is tragic because it reveals a divine marriage built on imbalance. The myths are not modern moral allegories, yet they preserve a clear unease. Zeus is magnificent, but he is not safe. One lesser-known story sharpens this further. When Zeus desired the sea nymph Thetis, a prophecy warned that her son would be greater than his father. Zeus withdrew and arranged her marriage to the mortal Peleus instead. Out of that decision came Achilles. Here, at last, desire bows before caution. It is a rare moment when Zeus does not reach for what he wants because he remembers too well the old family wound of succession. The sky god, who toppled his father, is still haunted by the shape of inheritance. Perhaps it is why so many tales of Zeus feel restless even at their most beautiful. He changes shape in a bull, swan, shower of gold, eagle, husband, stranger. He crosses borders easily, but those below him must live with what remains after the crossing. Children are born, dynasties begin, women wander, hide, endure, or become sacred through suffering. To tell these stories softly does not mean telling them falsely. Zeus is not lovable because he is harmless. He endures as a mythic figure because he concentrates something human beings have long recognized in power itself. Its brilliance, its fertility, its capacity to create whole worlds of meaning, and its repeated failure to protect the vulnerable from the force of its own desire. A ruler becomes interesting not when he wins once, but when the world keeps testing him. Zeus, even after the Titanomachy, does not settle into untroubled permanence. Greek myth returns him again and again to crisis, as if to ask whether any throne, even on Olympus, can truly rest. One of the earliest and most famous tensions is with Prometheus, the clever titan who sided with Zeus in the war and later quarreled with him over the human race. At Mycone, Prometheus tricked Zeus during a sacrificial division, wrapping bones in inviting fat while hiding the edible meat elsewhere. Zeus saw through the trick, at least in most versions, but allowed it to stand as the pattern for future sacrifice. Humans would burn the inedible portions for the gods and keep the meat for themselves. The episode is not only about deception. It explains ritual and exposes irritation between ruler and rebel intelligence. When Prometheus then stole fire and gave it to mortals, Zeus answered with punishment. Prometheus was chained and an eagle fed on his liver in a cycle of recurring torment. Humanity, meanwhile, received Pandora, whose jar or box in later retellings released troubles into the world. These stories can make Zeus seem harsh, even petty. Yet beneath them lies a deeper theme. Fire is technique, craft, the dangerous leap by which humans move closer to divine capability. Zeus resists that leap, not because he hates creation itself, but because boundaries in Greek myth are always under negotiation and never without cost. Another crisis comes in the story of the flood sent against a violent human race. Different traditions vary, but Zeus looks down and sees corruption so thick that the age seems spoiled beyond repair. Rain falls without mercy. Rivers swell. The old ground disappears under gray water. Only Deucalion and Pyrrha survive by piety, foresight, or divine favor, drifting until the waters recede. When they repopulate the earth by casting stones behind them, which become people, the story suggests renewal through humility. Zeus destroys, yet not to leave emptiness forever. He clears a space for beginning again. Then comes Typhon, the monstrous challenger born, in some accounts, from Gaia's rage after the defeat of the Titans. Typhon is not a rival in the ordinary sense. He is a storm of limbs and serpents, a mountain-sized threat whose voice is a whole bestiary of sounds. This is the kind of enemy myth invents when ordinary scale no longer feels adequate. Zeus meets him with thunderbolts, but some traditions preserve an unsettling detour. Typhon briefly overpowers Zeus, cuts out the sinews from his hands and feet, and hides them. Hermes and Egipan recover them, and Zeus returns to the fight. That detail is precious because it saves the story from simplicity. The king of gods can be wounded. He can lose mobility. He can require rescue. His final victory, where he crushes Typhon beneath Etna or another volcanic height in later imagination, means more because it passes through vulnerability. The storms that roll from those mountains become the breath of a buried enemy and the memory of Zeus's answer. Even Olympus itself is not free of rebellion. In one tradition, Hera, Poseidon, and Athena conspire to bind Zeus. The plan nearly succeeds until Thetis summons Briareus, one of the 100-handers, whose arrival breaks the coup. The episode lasts only a moment in surviving literature, but it flashes open an extraordinary possibility. Even the supreme god can be restrained if enough powers align against him. Authority remains something that must be defended, not merely possessed. In the Trojan War, Zeus appears again in a more measured register. He is not simply throwing lightning in anger. He is weighing fates in golden scales, watching armies surge and fail, deciding when to permit divine intervention and when to hold the gods back. At one point, he looks upon his son Sarpedon, doomed to die, and considers saving him. Hera warns that if he rescues one beloved child from destiny, other gods will demand the same. Zeus lets Sarpedon fall and grants him honor in death instead. That scene may be one of the most revealing in all his mythology. Zeus can command storms, topple titans, and shake Olympus, but he does not erase every destined sorrow. The Greeks often imagined fate, the Moirai, as older or at least stubbornly independent even in the reign of Zeus. So the Thunderer becomes something subtler than absolute power. He is the king who can do much and yet not everything. This is why his stories remain compelling. They do not flatter authority into perfection. They place a crown on force, then surround it with law, rebellion, grief, cunning, monster shape, and the silent weight of what cannot be undone. Zeus survives each test, but not as a simple victor. He survives as a ruler continually defined by what resists him. Why does Zeus remain recognizable after temples have cracked? After sacrifice, smoke has thinned into history. After the old hymns survive mostly in books and classrooms. Part of the answer is very simple. You still look up. Storms still gather above ridges and coastlines. Lightning still makes the world visible in a single white instant. The Greeks gave that force a face, a family, a temper, and a throne. They did not do this because they were naive. They did it because weather feels personal even when you know it is not. The sky can bless a field or ruin it. It can shade, roar, delay, open, and withhold. To imagine Zeus was to imagine that power had motives, memory, and perhaps standards. Whether those standards were comforting was another matter. But the world became legible through story. His presence also persists because he gathered so many human concerns under one name. In Zeus, you find authority and anxiety, fatherhood and distance, justice and appetite, hospitality and punishment. He is not a clean moral example. He is a map of contradiction at the highest level. That is why artists, playwrights, philosophers, and modern retellers keep returning to him. A flawless god becomes decorative. Zeus remains discussable. Archaeology deepens that feeling. On Mount Lycaon, on Olympus, at Dodona, at Olympia, and in many smaller sanctuaries, traces of devotion remain in ash, figurines, inscriptions, and altars open to the sky. Some worship took place not inside grand enclosed temples, but at high places where wind itself was part of the ritual environment. This matters. Zeus was often encountered under open air, where no roof interrupted the sense of exposure. To honor him was to stand where human smallness became impossible to ignore. At Olympia, the games once unfolded under his patronage, joining athletics striving to sacred observance. Victory there was not merely sport. It was display, offering, prestige, and prayer braided together. At Dodona, seekers listened for answers in leaves and bronze resonance. That image alone may explain his endurance. The greatest of gods speaking not only through catastrophe, but through patterns requiring patience to hear. His afterlife and culture stretches far beyond Greek religion itself. The Romans identified him with Jupiter, and through Jupiter his shadow entered later language, art, and political symbolism. Planets, statues, operas, poems, paintings, and films still turn toward the old sky father. whether to admire him, question him, or strip him down into archetype. Even when belief changes, the shape of the story survives. Yet perhaps the deepest reason he persists is more intimate. Zeus allows you to think about power without pretending power is pure. He reminds you that the forces governing life may shelter and threaten in the same gesture. Rain feeds grain, lightning splits oak, a ruler keeps order and causes grief. A father protects some children and fails others. Myth does not solve these tensions. It gives them memorable form. And still, after all the battles, betrayals, punishments, and loves, the image that lingers can become unexpectedly calm. Not Kronos swallowing in panic, not Typhon writhing under rock, not even the flash of the bolt. Instead, perhaps the old oak at Dodona moving softly in the wind, each leaf answering the others. Or the child in the Cretan cave, hidden but breathing, while shield beats guard the possibility of a different future. That is the gentle truth resting inside the thunder. Zeus is not only a story about domination from above. He is also a story about survival against fear, about order wrestled from chaos, about the long human wish to believe that the violence of the sky might also contain meaning. You do not have to kneel at an altar to feel why that wish endures. You only have to remember how small a human body feels beneath cloud, and how comfortingly large a story can grow around that feeling. So let Zeus rest where the Greeks often placed him, in high air, above bright stone, beyond the eagle's turn, never fully tame, never fully distant. Let the thunder fade into space around the mountain. Let the oak keep whispering, and let the last shape of the myth be not fear, but vastness made bearable by narrative, as if the sky itself had leaned down long ago and agreed to tell you its name. And that's where this story comes to a rest. Close your eyes, carry this story with you, and slowly drift off to sleep. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to Close Your Eyes, Listen to Stories. There's always a new story waiting for you here. Sweet dreams.